23 stab wounds. That's what the official record says killed Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the ancient world, struck down in broad daylight by men he trusted with his life. But here's what historians buried for centuries. The autopsy told a completely different story. Only one of those 23 wounds was fatal. So, what actually killed him? The answer involves betrayal, a body already being destroyed from the inside, and a detail found in ancient medical records that changes everything we thought we knew about the most famous assassination in human history. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will never look at Caesar's death the same way again. March 15th, 44 BC. The Ides of March. Caesar walks into the theater of Pompey for a Senate meeting. He has been warned by priests, by his wife Calpurnia, who dreamed of his bloody corpse the night before, by his own soothsayer who looked him dead in the eyes and said those three now infamous words, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar ignored every single warning. Why? Because Julius Caesar believed he was untouchable, and for most of his life, he had every reason to. This was a man who survived civil war, political exile, capture by pirates, who actually held his captors ransom and then came back and crucified them. A man who conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon against direct orders, and made himself dictator of the most powerful empire on earth. But on that marble floor in Rome, surrounded by 60 senators with hidden daggers, the invincible Caesar fell. When the Roman physician Antistius examined the body, he made a discovery so specific, so precise, that it has fueled medical debate for over 2,000 years. Here's what he found, and why it matters more than you think. Before we get to that autopsy finding, and trust me, it reframes the entire assassination, you need to understand something about Caesar's body in the weeks leading up to his death, because the senators didn't just choose that day randomly. They chose it because Caesar was already vulnerable, and the reason why is something nobody talks about. Ancient sources, Suetonius, Plutarch, and Caesar's own private correspondence, describe a man whose body was quietly falling apart in his final years. Or Caesar suffered from what ancient Romans called the falling sickness. Modern neurologists, after studying the historical descriptions, believe this was epilepsy, specifically temporal lobe epilepsy, which causes seizures, sudden loss of consciousness, and in severe cases, progressive cognitive decline. In 46 BC, Caesar had 2 documented seizures in public. One during a military campaign in Spain. His soldiers watched their general collapse on the battlefield. He recovered, but the episodes were becoming more frequent. There's more. Ancient biographers describe Caesar in his final months as suffering from severe headaches, disturbed sleep, and what Suetonius calls sudden terrors, panic episodes that would wake him in the night. These are consistent with a neurological condition under serious stress. Now, here's where it gets medically fascinating. Some modern researchers have proposed that Caesar may have had a series of small strokes, transient ischemic attacks, in the months before his death. His behavior in early 44 BC reportedly changed. He became more erratic, more trusting of the wrong people, and, fatally, more dismissive of genuine threats. His body was betraying him long before any senator raised a blade. And that brings us directly to what Antistius found on the autopsy table. The physician examined all 23 wounds individually. He documented each one in detail, and his conclusion stunned Rome, because it directly contradicted what the assassins intended the world to believe. Only one wound killed Caesar. One. But which one? And more importantly, what does modern forensic science say happened in those final moments? Is where this story gets truly extraordinary. And it involves a detail about Caesar's own reaction during the attack that ancient sources recorded, but almost no one has connected to the cause of death. Antistius identified the fatal wound as the second stab, delivered to the chest, penetrating between the ribs into the thoracic cavity. Modern anatomists who have analyzed his description believe the blade struck the aorta, or the pulmonary vessels surrounding the heart. 22 of the wounds, by Antistius's account, were survivable, painful, bloody, but not fatal on their own. This one single wound caused catastrophic internal hemorrhage. Now, here's what forensic pathologists argue when this case is examined through a modern lens. Caesar would not have died instantly. A wound to the thoracic vessels, while fatal, causes death through blood loss, a process that takes minutes. Ancient accounts confirm this. Caesar lived long enough after the initial attack to do something remarkable. He pulled his toga over his face. Think about what that means. In his final conscious moments, bleeding internally, surrounded by men driving daggers into him, Caesar made a deliberate choice to die with dignity, to not let Rome see his face contorted in death. Suetonius writes that Caesar also arranged his toga to cover the lower half of his body as he fell, so that he would appear composed even in death. And that is the psychological portrait of a man who, even dying, was performing for history. But there is one more layer to this. One final piece of evidence that modern researchers have raised that completely reframes how quickly Caesar's body gave out, and it connects directly back to his neurological condition. Because here is the question that forensic historians have started asking. Given that 22 wounds were survivable, would a man in peak physical health have survived that attack? Could Caesar, had he been younger, stronger, neurologically intact, have lived? The answer may be yes. And if so, what actually killed Julius Caesar wasn't just the blade. It was everything that had already been happening inside his body for years. Dr. Francesco Galassi and Dr. Bhutan Ashrafian, medical researchers who published analysis in journals including Ancient Science of Life and work covered by The Lancet, have presented the case that Caesar's epilepsy and possible cardiovascular deterioration made him dramatically more vulnerable than the historical narrative acknowledges. A body already under neurological stress, experiencing compromised circulation from possible transient strokes, would hemorrhage faster. Blood pressure dysregulation, a known complication of the condition Caesar displayed, would have accelerated his blood loss catastrophically. In plain terms, a healthier Caesar may have survived the attack. The senators who plotted his assassination may have unknowingly relied on a body that was already in decline to finish the job that their blades started. There is also the psychological dimension, which ancient sources hint at but never state directly. Caesar, in those final seconds, did not fight back. He did not call out for help. He covered his face and fell. Suetonius records that when Caesar saw Marcus Junius Brutus, his protege, the man many believed was actually his illegitimate son, raise a dagger against him, Caesar stopped resisting entirely. He simply said, in Greek, not Latin, which is itself historically significant, "Kai su teknon," you too, child, and then he was still. Whether that was surrender or shock or the neurological effects of his condition collapsing under catastrophic blood loss, no one can say with absolute certainty. But the convergence of evidence points to something historians have resisted saying plainly. Julius Caesar was not killed by 23 senators. He was killed by one wound, to a body that had already been at war with itself for years. What makes this so important, beyond the drama of Rome, is what Antistius did. He conducted what is now recognized as one of the earliest recorded forensic autopsies in human history. His methodical, wound-by-wound examination established a framework for forensic pathology that echoes through medical practice to this day. Caesar's death didn't just change Rome, it accidentally gave the world its first blueprint for forensic medicine. The men who killed Caesar believed they were ending tyranny. What they actually did, beyond the political consequences that Octavian, later Augustus Caesar, would exploit to build an even more powerful empire, was create the moment that forced medicine to look at the body as evidence. Because of a dying man on a marble floor, and one physician who had the precision to document exactly what he saw, we inherited a tool that has solved murders, exonerated the innocent, and reshaped justice for 2,000 years. So, here is the full picture, the answer the title promised you. Julius Caesar was killed by a single stab wound to the chest, but his body was already compromised by progressive neurological disease, possible cardiovascular deterioration, and the physiological toll of decades of war, stress, and physical trauma. The assassination succeeded not because 60 senators were more powerful than the most dangerous man in the ancient world. It succeeded because Caesar's own body had already begun its surrender, and one precise blade found the exact moment of maximum vulnerability. The Ides of March didn't kill Julius Caesar, they just arrived at the right time. 2,000 years later, we are still studying what they built, because nothing since has quite matched it. That is not nostalgia. That is the honest conclusion of the science. Rome didn't just conquer the ancient world, it conquered the limits of the human body itself. And that is a story that never gets old.